What's up, YouTube? This is Josh with a very important discussion for Rage of the Abyss format. Today we're going to talk about this little feller, Mulcharmy Fuwalos. This is not the only time you're going to see it. You're going to see him a lot in this upcoming format. If you don't know what this card does, it's a new hand trap that works just like Mulcharmy Fuwalos, where if you have no cards on your field, you can discard it, and then for the rest of this turn, you're gonna draw cards every time your opponent summons, where Fuwalos is from the hand. This one is deck and extra deck, which obviously has huge implications for a lot of meta decks out there. And I want to discuss today a little bit about what I expect from this card. Do I expect people to main deck this? Do I expect people to side deck this? How do I expect people to deal with this card? How does this card even maybe influence your potential deck choice for the upcoming format? Because there is going to be decks that are going to function into this card better, and there's going to be decks that are going to be a lot worse into this card. So I think that's something worth talking about. Before we go into this, I want to emphasize, I thought about this card a lot in the recent days. I personally do not think that this card is even close to the power and oppressiveness of Max C. I think this card is very good. I think this card is going to see a lot of play, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as Max C. And I think in some ways, maybe in a couple of weeks, we might even look back on this card and be like, hey, it's not as bad as Max C. This actually helps in some instances, because I'm going to take that up front. This card is broken, but it is especially broken against the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh right now. There's a lot of mid-range decks that completely get destroyed by Max C, but don't get destroyed by Fuwalos. We'll talk about those kind of options as well. Just already the fact that it doesn't work when you go first, like you can't make a board and then Fuwalos your opponent like you can do with Max C, is good. That's an issue, of course. Like, as you can see on the table right now, I have rare Fuwaloses from the OCG right now. Shoutouts to Holon Card Shop once again for hooking me up with some OCG cards. Check out their link in the description down below. In the TCG, this card is going to be a secret rare, which is a very unfortunate topic, of course. Like, this card is going to be super expensive for good reason. This card is going to be in almost any deck at a competitive level. Now, some decks are going to want to main deck it, and some decks are going to want to side deck it. We'll get into when I would do what. That is a very unfortunate topic. I don't really know what to say about that. It always hurts me when super generic staple cards are secret rare like that, because it's gonna hurt the casual player base the most, because they're already playing like a rogue deck because of budget, and then they're also not gonna have access to the best non-engine. First and foremost, will you main deck this card? For most decks, in my opinion, the answer is going to be yes. I would definitely main deck this card if my deck had a way to discard it when I go first. Let's say you're playing Snake Eyes and you play Diabell Star and Sinful Spoils Deception with the new set. Auto include in Snake Eyes, in my opinion, because you can get rid of it if you don't need it. In Chimera, you can just fuse it away, so you definitely play it in that kind of deck. Any sort of runic combo variant, of course, they're not the most meta relevant, but that's another example where you can just pitch it. Centurion is another deck that can main deck it and then just pitch it for the field spell. So those are the kind of decks where, in my opinion, you will always main deck this card. If you don't have a way to discard it, you're basically playing a card like Dark Ruler in your main deck or Evenly that doesn't have any applications when you go first, but is a very good card when you go second. Now let's talk about the implications this card has on the game. The one thing about this card that makes me hate this card a lot less than Max C, at least in my head, keep in mind, I haven't played in a format with this card yet. This is mostly in theory. I feel like this card offers you a little more ability to play around than Max C. There is decks where you can take a line under Fuwalos that would never be possible under Max C. And I'm going to use Centurion as an example just because I have all the cards around and I do really like the deck. And I think it's a great example of a mid-range deck that is weaker than other decks, but can benefit from this card. If you go Primera and place a Trudea, you're already kind of cooked if you get Max Seed on the Trudea here, because you're gonna have to like make a suboptimal combo by synchroing immediately into an Auxilla, and your opponent has already drawn 2 cards off of Max C, and you haven't even gotten your full setup because you didn't go through Trudea and summoning the other one, right? If you go Trudea effect and your opponent has Mulcharmy Fuwalos, you will still be able to use the Trudea effect, place the Gargoyle or whichever one you're playing, summon out the Gargoyle. They won't draw for this. You make 1 synchro, so they draw 1 card off of Fuwalos. This goes back to your hand. This adds you the trap card. You can proceed to the end phase, place the Primera here. You have the field spell up. I skipped that part. And you basically have done the full Centurion combo, and your opponent has only drawn 1 card off of Fuwalos. Under Max C, this would have been 1, 2, 3 draws. You can use 2 Fuwalos though. All right, Einstein, what happens if they use 2 Fuwalos? How many cards do they draw now? Anyways, moving on. Thank you for that valuable input. What I'm trying to say is that I think there are more lines to play around Fuwalos than there are to play around Maxi, especially for mid-range decks. And in my head, that is a positive thing, right? Because if you think about it, the decks that don't really have a way to respect Fuwalos are the decks that do way too much anyways. Plants, Snake Eye and Yubel, like those kind of decks, like their lines draw an absurd amount of cards under Fuwalos. There are some rogue decks that are really going to suffer from it, but like for the most part, I think if you look at the metagame right now, the decks that suffer the most from it are anything that uses the Fiendsmith engine, because the Fiendsmith engine is terrible into Fuwalos. The Centurion combo, 1 draw into Fuwaros. The Fiendsmith combo, Engraver, no draw yet. Cracked, Lurie, Requiem, 1 draw. Requiem effect into the new Lacrima, 2 draws. Send another Fiendsmith, bring back the Fiendsmith, link into Sequence, 3 draws. Sequence effect to summon like Desiree, 4 draws. Fiendsmith gets cooked by Fuwaros. And so does the entirety of Yubel. This summons from deck, this summons from deck. If you destroy Yubel, you summon the Terror Incarnate from the deck, and then obviously you're making a whole lot of extra deck summons. Every Phantom, Yama into Rage is multiple summons from the extra deck. If you want to set up the Varudras, that's an extra draw. Caesar, the Fiendsmith cards are also in this deck. So the question now is, what are people going to do if Fuwalos is dropped onto you? And I'm gonna be honest with you, if your deck does not have a good answer to Fuwalos, like not a good line under Fuwalos, I would not play a deck that does not have a good plan under Fuwalos. And when I say a good plan, I mean like an actual solid plan. For example, I think Snake Eyes are genuinely not terrible into it. It depends what you start with. If you start with Bonfire or Snake Eye Ash, it's like, okay. Like for example, if you go Snake Eye Ash into Poplar, and then they Fuwalos you here, Poplar searches Divine Temple, and Divine Temple places like whatever you want, Snake Eyes, Diabellstar, or Flamberge, or Oak, but then you can go IP Masquerena and give them 1 draw. And you have Temple plus 2 things in the spell trap zone. And that's like fine. That's genuinely okay if you have non-engine in your deck. Like that's not terrible. But it stops you from doing completely crazy things, which is good. And then the Fire King cards, which can honestly to an extent function quite well under Fuwaros as well. I don't want to go through every single deck. I think these 2 cards are going to be your best friends in most decks against Fuwalos. There's obviously other cards that you can end on, but IP Masquerena and Silhouette Rabbit are like the easiest one to reach with just 1 summon from the extra deck. And I think that is mostly going to be the goal. Don't summon more than once from the extra deck after you get Fuwalos. Certain decks can do that, and certain decks can't. A lot of decks will unfortunately get caught in the crossfire, I think, because like I said, not every rogue deck or not every mid-range deck has the luxury like Centurion to end on like a really good combo under Fuwalos and not actually care about it. Labyrinth is another deck that really does not care about Fuwalos, obviously, right? So I think those kind of decks are going to get a boost, but I think based on the fact that this card hits mostly the most degenerate decks in the format right now the hardest, I actually don't mind it right now. Like in my head, I think Fuwalos is going to be better for the game than people think, because it is overall a more balanced version of Maxi. And I always felt like the idea behind Maxi was fine. The execution was just very outdated. I have some hope that we're going to look back at Fuwalos and be like, it's not actually as cringe as we expect it to be. It could be, I'm not sure. In case you're wondering, what should I do with Fuwalos coming to the game? What kind of routes can I take in terms of beating this card or playing around this card, and in deck choice in general? In my opinion, there's 3 things you can do. You can just keep playing whichever deck you're playing that's terrible into Fuwalos. Ignore the card, quote unquote, by doing what everyone does in Master Duel, which is play the little mini game. You play your Yubel combo deck and you just include 3 Ash Blossoms, 3 Crossouts, and a Cult by the Grave, which will give you 7 outs to Mulcharmy Fuwalos. Whenever you're going first and your opponent has the card, you just look at your hand and you check if you have an out to it, and if you do, that's great, and if you don't, you lose. Sometimes the best deck in Master Duel has to play the Maxi minigame. It can still be the best deck because there's enough outs to it statistically that you're gonna have one often. Option B is, I think you can very realistically play a deck that just does not care about this card at all. There's a couple of options. Labyrinth, Tenpai is probably the most popular example because Tenpai goes second, so by default it doesn't care about this card. Blue or something like that, right? Kashtira. There's decks that don't care about this card at all. And then there's the third option, which is probably my preferred option right now, playing a deck that has a full combo that cares about Fuwalos, but has a solid line under it. For example, I think Snake Eyes and Fire King variations could be a lot better into Fuwalos than Yubel, because yeah, your full combo plays into it. You have to go for a weaker combo if you get hit with it, but it's by no means you're just passing the turn, right? It's so much better than getting hit with Max Seed. You have so many more options. You can still go for your Onyx special, your Garunix special from the hand, your Kirin revive. Your opponent won't draw for any of those, so you can still play a mid-range deck. Basically, you just need two different versions of your combo, one under Fuwalos and one not under Fuwalos. Another example is the Centurion deck I mentioned earlier. You can go for some fancier lines with the new level 8 synchro, fully setting up, drawing extra cards and all that kind of stuff. Like, it can be really powerful. If you get hit with the Fuwalos, you don't want to do that. You want to do the standard, just give them a singular draw and still end on your full Centurion combo, basically. I think those are your three options. I have mixed feelings about this card. I think it introduces a lot of interesting dynamics into the game because it doesn't completely end people's turns. Like, people actually have considerations to do of how much you do into this card. Do I end on IP, Silhouette Rabbit, SP, Lil Knight kind of boards, which honestly, when your opponent ends on these kind of boards and they have some non-engine with it, I feel like there's good Yu-Gi-Oh to be played. And that's what I want from a card like this, right? I don't want my opponent to just pass and die. I want a real game of Yu-Gi-Oh to be played. If I have 6 cards to play versus IP into SP and 1 or 2 hand traps, that's a real game of Yu-Gi-Oh. That's not auto win. The reason why I still have mixed feelings overall is because A, this card is gonna murder some rogue decks, Marincess or something like that, or Salamangreat, other rogue decks that simply don't have a way to really play around this card. That is sad. And the other thing is just like, I hate the fact it's a secret, because that means that instead of everyone getting to experience the dynamics it applies to the game, it's just going to be only available to the people that can afford a playset. It's looking like it's going to be quite significant. Another thing, while in the beginning everyone is going to main deck this card, I think there could be times where if this card is everywhere, I can see a world where people start playing more decks that don't care about it, and then I can see people moving it to the side deck. It is one of those cards that if it really has a huge impact on the game, it could make people play more fair decks, and therefore it could end up being a side deck card at some point. Lots of interesting things to say about this card. Not all positive though. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments down below of Mulcharmy Fuwalos. What are you gonna do? Are you just gonna try to out it? Are you gonna play a deck that doesn't care about it? Are you gonna try and find a line that ends on like IP Masquerena or Silhouette Rabbit? Or are you just gonna go second with Tenpai? A lot of possibilities. Let me know what you think of this card. Do you think it's going to be terrible for the game? Do you think it's going to be better for the game than people expect it to be? I'm gonna take a break from Yu-Gi-Oh! Is it the price point? I think the price point is a valid argument. I can't really blame anyone for not wanting to buy 3 of this card. I think that's very reasonable. I think its impact on the game, genuinely, I think it's going to be more positive than people expect it to be right now. I think there's a lot of people doom posting about it. I think the card itself is going to be fine. I think the price point is not fine. People are already calling for a ban. I am sick. I don't want this card to be banned, at least right now. There is a chance I'm wrong and the card ends up being more toxic than I expect it to be. I don't think so though. I'm quite positive about its impact on the game. I think it's going to be fine. So in that regard, I think what people should be calling for is a reprint. That's what we need. Also, another thing I wanted to say, the development of this card's price and all that has been so confusing to me, because Mulcharmy Fuwalos was announced and people were like, okay, this card is fine, this card is good, but it's not too crazy. And then Mulcharmy Fuwalos got announced. This card got a lot cheaper because of it, I feel like, because everyone was like, well, Fuwalos is going to be the more popular one. I'll say something right now. I don't think this card is going anywhere. I think people are going to main deck Fuwalos and side deck Fuwalos a lot. It's still 120 for a playset. It's still not a cheap card. If you think about the difference between the two, it's kind of weird, right? Because right now, this card is probably one of the most played hand traps in the format, right? Like, almost everyone is playing this card. It's in the side deck, but that doesn't really change the demand for the card. Like, whether you're maining or side decking the card, you still have demand for 3 Fuwalos, right? This card is a staple 3-of for most people, and this card is going to be a staple 3-of for most people. But this card is like over $100 and this card is like 30 to 40 because this card is better than this card. But that doesn't really matter because most people are going to play both. It's weird. It's very weird. I think Fuwalos is still good. Long story short. Let's have some discussion in the comments around this card. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.